everybody. My name's Sandy Beach, and I'm an alcoholic. It's really been a pleasure to have spent the weekend out here. There are different parts of the country that my friend Clancy calls pockets of enthusiasm. And if you live in one of those, you are a very lucky member of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's not like that everywhere. With this much energy and this much spirit, you really keep it going, because it's a very beautiful part of AA, is to see that much enthusiasm. And there certainly is plenty to be enthusiastic about. I mean, this is the greatest gift that a human being can receive, and we did nothing to deserve it. Nothing. If that doesn't somehow give us a clue that there must be a loving God, I don't know what would. I got sober on December 7th, 1964, and my home group is the Saturday Night Fever group in Tampa, Florida. And if you're ever in town, come on over. It's a big speaker meeting, and it's got a high energy, and it's a lot of fun. I'm going to talk a little bit about my story, and then spend a good bit of time, I hope, talking about my time in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I was born in New Haven, Connecticut in 1931. I have one sister who has 35 years in AA up in Connecticut, and her name is Sue, and she's very, very ill with her cancer. So those of you that like to pray for people, just add Sue to your list, and there'll be some grateful people up in Connecticut. And my parents obviously went through the Depression. Somehow they were able to take care of my sister and I, and we never were lacking for food. My mother was Catholic, my father converted, and we all went down and sat in the middle of Latin incense. The nuns that my sister loved, and they terrified me. And confession, which I did not like participating in, because even though they didn't tell us, I knew they were gathering evidence for later, and I wasn't telling them anything. And the reason I bring that up is that's not what the church was teaching, but that's what I decided it was. That was my perception. And my sister saw it as a loving, comforting, wonderful place to be, and we're sitting next to each other in the same pew. And so she took great comfort with her relationship with God, and I found it frightening. And so as time went on and I got old enough where I didn't have to go to church, I just stopped because I just was never comfortable there. And that is just the way life is. The big event in my childhood was World War II. It consumed the country. That's all we talked about. Everybody had a relative that was in it. Rationing, blackouts were on the East Coast. You had to have your curtains blacked out at night. There was submarines coming in. The German submarines were coming in, and so they blacked out everything. And my mother was an air spotter, and she would be up on this hill certain hours during the day and reporting in all airplanes that she saw. And I remember about every 6 months she'd look into her collection of pots and pans and decide that she could get it along without this particular saucepan, and she'd take it over the center of town and throw it into a circular area that was covered with chicken wire, and they would collect all those and melt them down for bullets. And 6 more months she'd go get another pan and take it over. So you could see it was a different atmosphere than we have today. There was a tremendous common enemy, and it united everyone in a way that only a common enemy can do. It's very similar to AA. we're united because there's something out there that's trying to get us all. And if we don't stand together, we're all going to fall down. And so it was quite an experience to be part of that, to just see it. And then, of course, as the war ended, and they, cranked up for mass production, and man, they were turning out the cars in the 50s. Everybody that lived in the 50s, that's the best cars ever built. They're just beautiful. And housing was available to everybody on a massive scale, and the GI Bill and the guys coming home and gals could go to college. And suddenly it was just an economy and a country that was on a roll, and everybody was really happy. But the unity was gone. Now it was, I want more than you, and you're in my way. And so it's funny how when you remove the common threat, we just kind of return to selfishness. It's just in human nature. And it wasn't until I got in the Marine Corps and then in AA that I saw anything like that, where I became part of something and it felt good. It was wonderful to put something ahead of myself. And of course we get in here and we put God ahead of ourselves, and put AA ahead, and we want to be a servant and all that. So that was the background that I had. And when I was about 10, I got polio. They hadn't invented the shots for the cure for that, to prevent it. And a lot of us got it. They had epidemics all over the place, and I lost use of my right arm and right leg. And I was in a home for crippled children for about 6 months, and I was one of the few that the Sister Kenny treatment worked for. And it consisted of physical therapy and hot packs put on your arms and legs. And somehow I got back probably 90% of the use of my arm and almost complete use of my leg. And again, when I got out of there, there was this freedom to run and be happy again. And I could remember how wonderful that was. I did pretty well in school, and I liked athletics, and so my father managed to get me into a little prep school outside of New Haven, and it funneled you right into Yale or Harvard, wherever you wanted to go. I didn't think much of it because I grew up in that city, and I worked on the Yale buildings. I was in construction, in the summer times, and liked to climb up high places and work on steeples and change light bulbs and radio towers and all that. You got more money, and it was dangerous. I think I always liked extra danger from the very beginning. And so when I arrived at the university, I hadn't started drinking. I was going to not drink. I was going to get high grades, and I was going to go out for the track team and try to do well there. And my roommates are all telling me, come on, you're in college, you ought to be drinking, make you feel one. No, don't want to do it. But as I got there, I suddenly started looking around, and this was not the same group of guys like I grew up with. These guys were like famous. They were rich guys, and they were the Bush family and the Rockefeller family. And I'm going, what the hell am I doing in here? And I suddenly had this fear they were going to find out that I didn't belong there according to those standards. And I just felt like I got to get out of here. I felt so inadequate. And I was at one of these things where you're supposed to meet 20 other guys, just walk up and go, hi, and, learn somebody's name, where they're from. I'd rather go in combat than to actually walk up to a group of guys and just keep going and hello, and interrupt them or whatever. So I got there that night and I said, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it tonight. And I started over, you know how they break up in groups, and I would start over to one group and they all turned, and you can communicate with your eyes. And I could see in their eyes, they didn't want anything to do with me. They're just looking right at me. You better not come over to this group. I'm sorry, I got the wrong group. I'm actually going over to this group over here. Sorry about that. And when I went over there, it was the same look. Like, I'm going to the guys in the back there. So I met no one. I almost walked up to 3 or 4 groups. And the thing I did normally to solve that problem was to leave. And then the anxiety goes away, and that's the end of that. But there was a bar there. And I said to him, well, maybe I'll have a drink, whatever that is. I wasn't much drinking around my house. And so I went up and ordered a whiskey and something and started drinking. It didn't taste very good. And I'm talking to the bartender, and I'm waiting to feel good. And then I got another one, and I'm waiting to feel good. And my third one, I was starting to go, my roommates are just kidding me that this stuff makes you feel good. I put the drink down, and I turned around. I think I was going to leave. And I looked out, and everyone in the room wanted to know me. And it was astounding. I didn't know where to start. So I just picked this crowd over here. They seemed to be beckoning me the strongest. And as I started walking over, I had the feeling that they would be lucky to know me. And so as you can see, alcohol didn't change me, but it changed the world that I lived in. And it made it a fabulous place. And I had so much fun. I talked and talked. All of my insecurity was gone. Fear was gone. I was free to be myself. And I just talked. Pretty soon they're leaving. Going, where are you going? Does that sound familiar? Where are you going? We're just getting started here. And pretty soon they're all gone. But the bartender was there, and I said to myself, wow, if 3 drinks did that, I wonder what 20 drinks would do. So I sat there and staggered back to the room, and of course the bed started spinning, the walls are closing in, and I'm in the bathroom throwing up all night and dying, just dying. And the next morning I sat on the bed just holding my head. I really thought maybe I was going to die. It just hurt so bad. And the thought occurred to me, are you going to drink again tonight? It didn't take very long for me to go, of course I am. This puking and dying is a small price to pay for what I had last night. So, there it is. Now, when non-alcoholics drink, they don't have that experience that is close to a spiritual experience. The whole world transforms and your place in it, and life makes sense. So they're not willing to drink like we did. When they drink, it's pretty good. Well, pretty good isn't worth vomiting blood for. You got to get up to wonderful before you're going to. And of course, when you and I drank, it was beyond wonderful, so it was worth any price. Now, I didn't realize I had made that deal that night, that I was willing to pay whatever it took to have this feeling and this relationship with the world. But pretty soon, I'm flunking courses, and athletics seemed stupid when you could get drunk instead. So everything just disappeared. It vanished. And the rest of the years there were kind of a blur. I would make it to class. I would do the best that I could. But mostly I was having fun. And I was drinking a lot. And somehow, by the skin of my teeth, I graduated. And the Korean draft was still on. So you had to join the military. And some friends of mine, we were sitting around drinking, and one of them said, why don't we go join the Marine Corps? And then we won't get drafted. And I said, yeah, I finished the beer. Sounded like a good idea to me. So I think 6 of us went down in that recruiting office in New Haven, and that guy was really happy when it's 6 at once coming in. He'd be making his quota. And so I signed up, and it wasn't too many months later that we were off. And those of you that have joined the Marine Corps, they have quite an introduction for you when you get there. And, whoa. I just remember going, why don't these sergeants lighten up a bit? I mean, come on, guys. And, of course, they made it as hard and as mean and all that as possible. And when we finished all that and then went 6 months to become a platoon leader at Quantico, by the time I finished that, I had fallen in love with the whole thing. With all the discipline, with all of this, it was just such an honor to be part of such a wonderful branch of the service. And while I was at this school, I saw they had training movies about if you wanted to go to flight school. And I think the training movie had two guys behind the bar talking with their hands, and they had white scarves on, and there was some blondes standing over on the side. And we were sleeping in foxholes, and I looked at that and I said, I think I'd be better qualified for doing that, even though I'd never been in an airplane. So I signed up for flight school, and it turns out I passed. I had good eyes. I had all the coordination stuff, and I had met this wonderful woman from Brantford, Connecticut. And so when I finished that schooling, I had my orders to Pensacola. I got married. We go off to have a honeymoon in New York and then fly down to Pensacola. And I got airsick on the plane flying to Atlanta. It was the old propeller airplanes that bounced all over the place. And then when I got to Pensacola, I got sick for about the first 5 flights. But then the motion sickness went away, and I started doing extremely well. I'd be number 2 or number 3 each phase as we went through. It takes 18 months. And we'd go into formation flying and night flying and bombing and gunnery and go aboard the carrier and then go on to advanced training and finally into jets. And finally I got my wings. I had a set of orders to go overseas to a fighter squadron. And the war was over. So, man, we're over in at Sugi, Japan, and flying these wonderful FJs, the F-86. We had a wonderful colonel. All the guys in the squadron, everybody was good at what they did. And, of course, back then, it's not true now, but back then, you really worked hard and played hard. And, boy, you didn't show up for happy hour. The colonel wanted to know where you were. Because we sat around the table, and he ordered the drinks. Bring another round here. And then everybody would drink until he said you could go home, and generally that was pretty late. And I still remember that the colonel ordered drinks as fast as I drank. Normally, us alcoholics, if you're in a crowd like that, you have to excuse yourself to go to the bathroom and stop by the bartender. Give me a double scotch on the rough. And then come back and get in on the next round of drinks because no one's drinking as fast as we are. Well, this squadron did, so I just was in home. We had a lot of fun, a lot of exciting missions. And about 2/3 through the tour over there, I was standing on the end of the runway with the maintenance officer. They were practicing to go aboard the carrier, and we were watching our guys practice. And he started talking about he's almost eligible to be a lieutenant colonel. He's going to get his own fighter squadron, and he wants nothing but the best pilots. And I'm a young lieutenant, and he pointed at me and he said, "I want you in that squadron." And I went, "Oh, wow." And then he said, "But I wouldn't let you drink." And I pretended I didn't hear him. I didn't want to ask him, "What do you mean?" I didn't know what he was going to say, but I didn't want to hear it. And it wasn't until I got to AA that I realized what was going on, that my drinking in the middle of all these heavy drinkers scared them. Because I was drinking with a different intensity than they were. They were over there without their families. You're going to party a little more than normal. So they were ratcheting it up a couple notches. I was way beyond that. And they could see that we drink with a seriousness to it that they didn't quite understand. And when they came back to the States, they cut back on what was more acceptable back here. I just kept going full speed, never slowed down anywhere. So that was my first indication. And then I came back and I had and we ended up having 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. And as they got older, and my boys started going to college, and so they were into drugs and alcohol, and I had this vision of the four of us all together in AA at once, my boys. Each one of them on his own said, well, that's enough of that stuff, and they practically stopped drinking and became very responsible citizens, married, wonderful fathers, and all that. And I was actually ashamed of them, if you want to know the truth. They just didn't have what it took to hang in here. But much to my pleasure, my three daughters showed my sons what it's all about. And they all became alcoholics. Anyway, I had some wonderful tours of duty. I was with the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines out in Camp Pendleton for a tour with the Marine Division as a forward air controller. It was a real honor to be with them. And I was a flight instructor for 3 years. Then I went to photo school. And my last squadron I was in was a photo squadron at Cherry Point during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, as this time is going along, on the outside, you would think that I was doing pretty well. I got promoted. Now I'm a captain. We have all these children. People like me. I'm funny. I'm still able to fly well. But it was going to end very soon. Because alcohol was now demanding that I start drinking during the day, or I wasn't going to make it. So I would not drink for 10 hours prior to flying. And by the time I got in the airplane, I was starting to go into withdrawals from alcohol. And that's a very scary thing to be doing when you're flying a high-performance jet. Because I felt like I was going to pass out. My hands are real shaky, and I'm not making clear decisions. My vision is getting messed up. And there was no alcohol program in the Navy. They didn't come in till the 70s. And so you couldn't be an alcoholic. You could be crazy, but there was no doctor to talk to. I never heard of AA. And I said, I'm just going to have to keep doing this and then see what happens. And it just kept getting scarier and scarier. I almost passed out a couple times. And I ended up flying, probably for the last 2 months, I would fly with one hand on the ejection seat. I'd pull the curtain part way. And then on the stick in the photo plane, all the cameras were there. So you could fly the mission with just one hand. And my theory was that if I passed out, I'd yank that thing as my head went forward. Boom, I'd be ejected. The plane would crash. The parachute opens automatically at 10,000 feet. Problem solved. It was like, whew. They almost had me there for a while, but the old fox knows how to figure his way out of things. And of course, like any other job, the instruction manual, in this case the pilot's handbook, did not have any instructions on flying that plane during alcoholic withdrawals. It wasn't in there. And I'm sure it's those of you that had other jobs, and it didn't explain how to be a nurse during a seizure. So we had to come up with our own creative ways of handling this situation. And I've heard a lot of funny things from different professions of how they handled these. Well, the end came when I was in a flight of 4 airplanes on a cross country. We had 2 kinds of airplanes, the F-8 Crusader, which was the real hot plane photo. And we also had the old F-3D, which was a radar jamming plane. So we could do both missions. And we were on a cross country. I don't remember where we had been. We were flying home. And I decided I had to get out of the plane now. I mean, I can't wait. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I thought I was going to pass out. I knew something awful was going to happen. This had happened to me a couple of times. It happened one time I was getting a haircut. And I just turned to the barber and I said, I got to go now. He said, but I'm not through. This is good enough. I have to leave now. And it was one of those panic, I can't stay where I am. A lot of times when you first come to AA, you have to sit in the back row because you might have to leave any second. And so I relate to that. So I started looking around. This plane didn't have an ejection seat. It had a panel that you lifted up and you slid out the bottom. And I was looking at the panel trying to remember how the hell it worked. And I realized this radar guy doesn't know how to fly. So I can't just say, see you later. And he's over there, hey. So I declared an oxygen emergency with the flight leader. I said, we're having oxygen problems over here. And when you have that, you have to land right away because it could be bad and you would pass out. So he found an Air Force base nearby. We immediately went down, landed, and I went into the old club, had a few drinks, thought I was, but the next morning I went down the flight line. We're going to now come back home. And I looked at the airplane, and I turned to the flight leader, and I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. Now, I've been doing this for 14 years. It was me. It was my whole life. This is it. And alcohol just said, by the way, Sandy, you're going to give up flying right now. And he said, what are you talking about? And, we knew each other pretty well. I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. And I don't remember how we got back. Somebody else flew or exactly the details. But then I had to see the colonel. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. And he said, why? I said, Colonel, I'm just not going to do it anymore. And if you say that long enough, they have to take you seriously. And so he wrote a letter to Headquarters Marine Corps saying, Captain Beach no longer wants to be on flight status. And I had to wait 3 months until they give me some other area to specialize in that doesn't involve flying. It ended up being air traffic controller. But while I was waiting for these orders, I had to stay in the squadron, and I no longer wanted to even look at my fellow pilots because I knew what they were thinking. This is a very exclusive squadron. There were no lieutenants. It was all captains, a couple majors, and a lieutenant colonel. And it was a real honor to be in that squadron. And so I agreed to do the legal work until I left. And so I had my own little office. I did special court martials and those kind of things. And whenever people would come by, I wouldn't look at them. I'd just look down because I knew what they were saying. Well, how did this piece of junk get in our squadron? I mean, this is, So I had 3 months of, the only thing I remember feeling was shame. I just wanted to get out of there. I didn't want to look at anybody. And I don't think I said goodbye to too many people. I just had my orders and I just went. And I was out in Los Angeles a couple of years ago. Some people have heard this story. And I was going to lead a meeting at the Brentwood group, which is about 500 people. And it's the format is that you get an old-timer, and he gets up and talks a little bit about his story, but he comes up with a topic and talks about it for 30 minutes. Chuck Chamberlain used to go there a lot. And then people in the audience would ask him questions about it. It's a great format. And a lady was coming to get her 30-year medallion, and her husband is not in AA, but he went to meetings with her for a long time. But that night he was just going to go drink coffee, and she's telling him that this guy named Sandy Beach is coming, is going to lead the meeting. And he said, I think I know him. Was he a pilot? And she said, yeah. Well, tell him to come out here. I'm going to talk to him. So I go out before the meeting starts. This guy's standing there. I've never seen him. And he looks at me and he said, in 1962, you were in a flight of 4 F-3Ds coming back to Cherry Point, and you declared an oxygen emergency, and you never flew again. And I went, how the hell do you know that? He said, I was in the plane with you. And so what are the odds 42 years later you're going to run into a guy that was in the plane? And I said, you were? I said, holy cow. And we chatted briefly, but the next day he came up to Oxnard where I was at a convention, and he brought photographs from the squadron. He had all this stuff to refresh my memory. I said, oh yeah, I remember that colonel. Oh yeah. Turns out he wasn't a radar guy. He was a American airline pilot that had been recalled for the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he retired as the second senior pilot American. And he said to me after we've been talking for a while, he said, did you know how popular you were in that squadron? He said, it broke everybody's heart that you were leaving. The colonel was going crazy trying to find some answer to this. He called everybody. He called flight service. He just said, and when you left, we almost cried. And I said to myself, well, that's not how I remember it. So I had to go back 42 years in the past and change my past and put in the truth. And now when I think about that period of time, I really have almost a smile on my face to realize how much I was loved by these guys. And I would submit to you that a great deal of our program consists in doing that exactly. Going back and changing your past. Substituting your version of what it was with what actually happened. I may have mentioned this morning, but there's a couple speakers, they start their talk by saying, my story is divided into two parts, what happened during the years that I drank and what I thought happened during the years that I drank. And we could make that same statement about our childhood, grammar school, high school, college, whatever it is. High school, divided into two parts. What happened when I was in high school and what I thought happened when I was in high school. And it's amazing how wrong we were about things. This is one of the reasons that as we get more and more sober, our family straightens out. They don't straighten out. We finally see them as they really are instead of how we thought they were. And we find out that our mean father was doing the best that he could. And he was raised by an alcoholic. He was working 3 jobs. No wonder he's in a bad mood when he's coming home. And we get to understand people. And so the lesson out of that weekend was very powerful for me. And this guy, Jim Hath, who was the airline pilot, we stay in touch, and I've been out there a couple times. And it just made everything so different to be dealing with the truth rather than my version of what happened. And since we don't know whether what we think is true or not, it's worth inventorying. It's worth doing step work over. It's worth finding out. I had a wonderful example of this when my parents were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. And my sister was organizing it because they were all up in Connecticut. And she was telling me the list, and she's going over, yes, and then cousin Jack, and then cousin, all of it. We had more cousins. My mother had 8 sisters and brothers. And she mentioned that Uncle John was coming. And I said, oh, Sue, do you have to invite him? Good God, Sue, God. He's so abrupt and kind of rude. And she said, he's only like that when you're around. And I went, a good guy like me? I mean, what are you talking about? I'm so good-natured and all that. And she had about 25 years sobriety then, so I'm going, could it be possible that he's a nice guy and that something I do? I said, this is pretty far-fetched. And if she wasn't in AA, I don't think I would have bought into it. But I decided she was right. So when he showed up, I ran up to him and I said, Uncle John, I'm so glad to see you. I'm so happy you're at this thing. It's so important that you're here. He was taken a little bit aback. And then he went, well, I'm so glad to see you. And that was the end of it. And so I really did do something to trigger these things. I am the one that causes certain behaviors in other people. In our literature, it talks about we bring out the very worst in people. Can you connect to that at all? I mean, we're so erratic. One minute we're being nice, the next thing, let's rob a bank, and let's run over that cop. And so people, when they're with us, are a little edgy, to say the least. And when you're self-centered and selfish, wherever you go, we're rude to waitresses. If we don't get waited on time, let me say the manager. And we come into AA and we inventory all this stuff, and we start seeing there's a way to bring out the best in people, to be extra nice to them, to try and understand what they're doing. Your daughter's getting married, you've got your special suit being dry cleaned, and they lose it. And what do you say to the person who's waiting on you? I want your eldest born son? Is that what you're going to say? Or could you say, look, it's not your fault that it happened. I have another suit. Don't worry about it. Now, when you say something like that to a clerk, and you come back the next week, there's a smile on their face a mile wide. And so we really control the world that we live in by how we treat it. And suddenly, under our new spiritual center, we keep running into great people. I had a hell of a day today. Everywhere I went, people were happy and they were nice to me. They were glad to see me. It's really amazing how the world has changed. Because in the old days, everywhere I went, there was some jerk and they're terrible, mean. I had no idea. I was producing this. I was creating the very thing I was complaining about. Isn't that amazing? What we have, the power that's inside. And so these little lessons over the years have transformed the world that I live in, just like alcohol used to. Only it takes longer than it did with alcohol, but it's more meaningful and it's real. And so when we say we live in a better world, it's because our spiritual energy creates that world, and we get to enjoy living in it. Now, I'm not saying we can do that all the time. It's hard to stay unselfish all the time. But you can certainly, year after year, see the progress that you're making in your own life and reap the rewards of treating people with harmony. And like the prayer of St. Francis, I always like that, where there's discord, bring harmony. It's kind of like music. I can't sing worth a damn, but I so admire people that can, 4 people, and they just get up and they go, and all the 4 voices fit perfectly. And they know all the different keys and they know all the different ways to sing. Whereas an alcoholic only knows one note. Me. But we're considerate of others. We're perfectly willing to hold the me until they get in harmony with it, which is pretty considerate. So if there's going to be any harmony, it's going to be you adjusting to me. And this does not create harmony. And so there's just wonderful lessons in realizing that you are causing the very problems that you're complaining about. It's also freeing. The ego doesn't like it because it makes it look bad. But there's an exciting thing. Chuck Chamberlain used to tell me that one of his favorite things was to be wrong. He'd just go, I just found something else I'm wrong about, and I'm about to get rid of it. Oh, man, am I excited. And that's why we have 2 steps. 4 and 10. What else am I wrong about? What else am I wrong about so I can get rid of it? The first time my sponsor cornered me into admitting I might be wrong, I had no wiggle room. He trapped me. And so I looked at him and I said, okay, Bill, I got it. You're right. He said, no, you're wrong. And I said, well, it's the same thing. Well, let me hear you say it. The words wouldn't come out of my throat. I thought I was going to die. Wrong. And then I found out how freeing it is. I'm wrong. And I can freely admit it. I made a mistake. I was wrong. You don't die when you say it. You get free. And it becomes a way of just taking a load off your shoulders. Because if you're wrong and you won't admit it, you got to carry that and defend these wrong ideas wherever you go. It gets tiring after a while, and then you accuse other people of being unreasonable for not letting you keep these wrong ideas. So that's enough about that. I did lose my Marine Corps career. I had a year as the air traffic controller, but the enlisted men, once I went through school, they saw that I didn't know what I was doing. I was half conscious some of the time. So I was overseas. I remember the gunnery sergeant saying, Captain, here's your tent. You just try to ride your bicycle to work every day. We'll give you some coffee, but don't you go near the radar. And as a result, I never ran 2 airplanes together or anything. But there came a time when I came back to Quantico to go to a junior school to become a field grade officer. I couldn't find the school. I couldn't remember where I sat. I was right on the edge of a convulsion. And eventually in that school I had a ground mal seizure and I bit my tongue almost in half, and they sent me up to Bethesda Naval Hospital to see what caused it. And of course they knew nothing about alcoholism, so they're treating me as if some food virus or something like that. And after about 7 days without alcohol, I went into the delirium tremens, started running all over the place, screaming at people, and they put me in a straitjacket, and I was locked up for 6 months. And so that was how I got sober, being locked up for that long. AA came into the hospital, and I heard about it. I was very attracted to it, but I wasn't convinced I was an alcoholic, if you can believe it. And so when I was let out as an outpatient, they told me if I ever drank again, my career's over. And on the way home, I said, they didn't mean if I drank again, they meant if I get drunk again. That's what they meant. And so it wasn't long before I was smuggling vodka back into the nut ward, waiting to get released back to active duty. And I decided one Sunday to call AA. And there was one other Marine in AA at Quantico, and it was my sponsor. He was another Marine captain. His specialty was explosive ordnance disposal. And he used to say it was the perfect job for an alcoholic because no one's looking over your shoulder while you're working. And he took me to my first meeting in Manassas, Virginia. I'd been sober about 3 hours when the meeting started, and it was a group anniversary, and they were having food, they were all these anniversary celebrations, and then they ended up square dancing. They had all these fiddle players. I've been there 4 hours, and I'm going, I got to get out of here. What is this? This is insanity. And I was standing on the front porch of this thing, and there were no street lights. It was December, and it was like drizzly, freezing rain kind of stuff, and I couldn't see which way to run. I mean, where's town? And I was standing out there debating, and I felt this hand on my shoulder, and it was an Al-Anon lady named Betsy Lynch. And it was like an angel. I turned around to see who it was, and she said, "Come on back in. Everything's going to be fine." And I believed her. That was it. And I went back in, and I did end up losing my career, but I ended up with some wonderful jobs. And I've had 31 years sobriety in D.C., and I moved down to Tampa. I've been there 15. I love it. Wonderful AA there. I had the same sponsor for 42 years, and we were a wonderful team. And he had emphysema. We lost a lot of people to smoking in AA, almost as many as drinking before. And the churches saved us by going non-smoking, because if they didn't, the fight would still be going on. I'm not stopping it. We're not going to make this a non-smoking meeting. Yes, we are. No, we're not. Suddenly, the harmony of the home group got shattered. I think we'd still be at it, except the churches saved us. And they won't let us do it. I'm sure some of you old timers remember we'd have no smoking on this side of the room. Yeah. The smoke is just as dense over there as it is over on this side. Don't tell me we don't stay self-centered. Anyway, when we knew he was dying, I went up and we went back to that Manassas group, and they arranged for me to tell my story, and Bill was there in a wheelchair. And we got talking afterwards, and I knew I wouldn't see him till the funeral. And we just chatted about how lucky we were to have 42 years running all over the place and knowing each other, and it was a blessing. And so I'm really lucky along those lines. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is my middle daughter came into AA, and she has about 11 years now. And my youngest daughter came into AA up in Connecticut, and she became chairman of the New Haven Conference when she had 3 years. And ran the whole damn thing. And it was the first conference. And they were meeting resistance. In New England, they don't have a lot of roundups that aren't organized by the service section. And most of the roundups are organized, just a group of people who want to put something on. Anyway, they had 700 people the first year. And I was a speaker, and my other daughter introduced me. And so it was really wonderful. And then their older sister we knew was an alcoholic, but she was resisting mightily. She didn't have anything to do with AA, and her husband wasn't helping and all of that. So anyway, last March, my youngest daughter was brutally murdered when she came home from taking her daughter to high school, and my middle daughter was there staying with her, and she found the body and handled all of the police and did all this stuff. She's just a real hero. I had just had hip surgery and couldn't even travel for a little while. And 3 months later, my oldest daughter died of alcoholism. A horrible, horrible death up in Virginia. Now, the reason I bring these up, first of all, I got so many cards from around the country, from groups and from individuals. And in my living room, I have these baskets full of cards for each daughter, and I have the memorial service program on top of each one. And there's probably about 500 cards in there with messages. And there's an Al-Anon group in Alaska. Every member signed it and sent it down. This is my testimonial. It's a place of honor for these two daughters. But I want to share how this went down, because 25 years earlier, I was watching television up in Washington, D.C., and a young teenage boy had been shot that day by another teenage kid. The kid that was shot was an A student. He happened to be in the wrong neighborhood. Bam. And his mother was being interviewed. A reporter found her and stuck a microphone in her face and said, "How do you feel about the boy that killed your son today?" And she said, "I've already forgiven him." And the reporter didn't know what to say. He was in shock. I was in shock. I had 25 years sobriety, and I went, how do you do that? I'm big in forgiveness. But the same day? And she was very spiritual, probably very religious. And she was totally at peace with forgiving. And I never forgot her. I would talk about her probably every 3 or 4 years. I'd go, that lady, I'd still see her. It was unbelievable what she did. And then I remember seeing the Amish when they had the shootings up there, if you all recall that. And the family of one of the kids that was shot went over to comfort the family of the boy who did the shooting. And I'm going, really? And it raised my sights way up high. And I would talk about that often. And I remember saying to myself, boy, if something like that happens to me, I hope I can do the same thing. And so when my daughter called me and asked if I was sitting down, and then she told me about what happened to Barbie, and then she went into the details, and we did this and we did that. Before she finished talking, I had already forgiven whoever did it. And it was complete, and it was forever. At the same time, I accepted the fact that this had happened, and from that moment on, my relationship with that daughter would consist of memories and great stories and photographs and all of that. Now, the reason I tell you this story is I did not have to deal with resentment, anger, or hatred. I only had to deal with sorrow. And God will carry you in sorrow, but He won't help you with hatred. That's your ball game. So the amount of suffering because of forgiveness is reduced by probably 80%. It's an absolutely astounding thing. And when my second daughter, I had done some more thinking about the spirituality of these things, and I learned a second lesson. So I'm going to pass it on to you. When you get shocking news, whatever it is, before you react to it, there's a pause. Generally, you're looking for a place to sit down before you let it sink in. Do you understand what I'm talking about? You go, oh boy, but you haven't emotionally reacted. You're getting ready to. And during that time, in that pause, you go to God and you say to Him, I just want to assure you this is not going to change how I feel about you. My relationship with you comes ahead of everything. And I just want to assure you that I'm going to go over and react to this, but it'll never get in the way of how I feel about you. And then I turn to go back and react to it. And guess who came with me? Guess who just was practically, I was in his arms. And he just let me have it, let it come in. And again, all I had to deal with was sorrow. I just passed that on because if I hadn't seen that lady, I never would have believed that the real power of forgiveness occurs as the event is happening. And of course, we had some teacher a couple thousand years ago being nailed to a cross who said, forgive them, they know not what they do. The forgiveness, why wait? That's my question to anyone. If you haven't forgiven somebody for something, why wait? There's no reason. It is the most freeing thing. We should talk about forgiveness a lot more in Alcoholics Anonymous, because if everyone in this room tonight forgave everything that ever happened to you, you'd almost float out of this room, because the weight you're carrying around would be so diminished. I went through, we just carry stuff forever without ever realizing that we could let it go through the process of forgiveness. So that's enough about those stories. I want to wrap up. I'm getting near the end of the time here. And I want to tell new people that you were here, you saw the sobriety countdown, you saw how much fun sobriety is. And when I sponsor people, I always tell them, this is going to be fun. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be fun. And we're going to be laughing. You're going to do all the work. And but I'll help you see it differently, and you'll see that it is fun. And something happens in here. To become free of self-centeredness is one of the greatest gifts you can have. And I remember telling my sponsor, I finally said, you know something, I've been thinking about it, Bill, I am self-centered. I really am. Much more than I never really let it sink in. And I immediately followed that with, and I'm going to do something about it. Really. You yourself are going to fix self-centeredness. How are you going to... How do you plan on pulling that off? Well, I'll just stop being self-centered. I'll be unself-centered. What the hell is that? It turns out the only way out of it is to become God-centered. That's it. You have to have a different center. And when you become God-centered, you find out that's the real center. And that everything looks wrong when you look at it from self-centered. It's just like when they thought that the earth rotated around the sun. I mean, the sun rotated around the earth. And they said, well, God, if it does, the movement of these other planets doesn't make any sense. It's all screwed up. And with great reluctance, they almost killed the guy. Remember, the astronomer that was concluding that, because that means everybody's going to have to change their mind about a lot of things. But when they did, everything was in order. And it looked correct. And so when we move from self-centered to God-centered, the world looks different because we're seeing it from the true center. And it's just an amazing phenomenon. So that's one of the things that you can do as you go through the steps. I do a lot of spiritual reading, and I'm starting to realize that many, many spiritual authors say that the biggest sin that man creates, we would call it a character defect, is self-pity. I never would have put it up that high, but as I think about it, it is the essence of separating yourself from God. To feel sorry for yourself. And it helps me to realize when that's coming on, that that's going to cost me dearly. To stay in self-pity. Oh my God, that's going to cost me dearly. So I pass that on to those of you that are new. The main thing that's going to happen to you, you are going to learn about yourself. And you're going to find out that a lot of the information you have about yourself is wrong. And I know it's yours, but it's wrong. You screwed up when you put it together. And you're going to find out you are one of the most marvelous, wonderful, loving, caring people that God ever created. And when you discover this truth about yourself, you're probably going to have tears in your eyes. And you're going to suddenly realize what your true potential is, where you belong in the world, and how lucky you were that you got forced into Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you all very much.